Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The word of God. You may be seated. It's been very hard to watch the news this week. Children in Gaza facing famine and having to stand for hours in lines to try to get water for their families. Like Rafif said, I wake up in the morning and have to search for water and things to burn to cook food. I used to wake up and go to school. I was very happy then. This week, the Washington Post put out an article with the names of all the children that have died in Gaza. 31% of people who have died in Gaza in this war have been children. Kenan Nassar, 9 years old, loved math and soccer, had a kind heart, and was killed in an airstrike while playing in a refugee camp. Tala, killed at 10 years old, loved parties, but had become very afraid of the war, the sounds of bombing, the presence of death. It's hard to watch the news and read the stories, and I was just scrolling through the Washington Post of all these names after names after names after names. And then in Ukraine, another Russian strike with children among the casualties. And then yet another heartbreaking act in our own Minneapolis, turning a sacred space of prayer into a valley of darkness. This cartoon from the Washington Post summed it up for me. God help us. We're making our way in these few weeks slowly through Psalms 23 and looking for what does this ancient song, this most beloved, extremely familiar song, have to say to us today. Last week, Pastor Icky went through the first 3 verses, and I had no idea. I really enjoyed this little tidbit that he included, that about 700 years before David ruled in Israel, Hammurabi, the 6th king of Babylon, had written, I made the people lie down in safe pastures. I did not allow anyone to frighten them. And Pastor Icky, I love that comparison of earthly rulers saying, I'm the one who makes the people lie down in the good pastures. I'm the good shepherd, versus David saying, the Lord Yahweh is my shepherd. Yahweh is the one that I'm looking to for leadership, the one who rules above all rulers, who leads us into green pastures, still waters, restoration, and right paths. But in verse 4, the one that I will be dwelling in today, in verse 4, the tone shifts. Now David brings us into a very dark valley. The Hebrew literally says the valley of death's shadow, or the shadow of death. Wadi Kelt is one of those dark valleys. This is a pretty incredible picture. It's hard to even see where the bottom of this valley is in Wadi Kelt. We're not sure exactly what a valley of the shadow of death David is thinking of as he thinks of his shepherding days and leading his sheep from the highlands to the lowlands and back in a cycle each year. But perhaps it could have been Wadi Kelt. It's the road that goes from Jerusalem to Jericho. You may remember it from the story Jesus told about the Good Samaritan. Shepherds often choose these valleys or gullies as they're taking the sheep to the summer highlands for grazing because, guess what? What runs through the valley? The water. The water, these deep gorges, these deep canyons or valleys, that's where the water is, and that's where the vegetation grows. And so that's where the sheep can find grazing in those long journeys. But these valleys are narrow, and they can be dark even during the daytime, because when you're down deep in a gorge, the sun cannot get there quite as easily. It can also be dangerous. You can be susceptible to flash flooding and predators because you can't see very well around you when you're in a narrow path, a narrow valley. This death shadow language, this strange poetic word, death's shadow, is used in other places in the Bible, mostly in the book of Job, describing suffering. So this word, the valley of the shadow of death, death's shadow, is used all of these different times in Scripture. And look, Job just outdoes them all in using this word. Job is focused on that dark, death's shadow valley. But we also see it used quite often in the Psalms, and then the prophets also use this word. And it was the word of the prophet that really caught my eye. Isaiah 9, verse 2 says, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shone." In case you don't recognize that verse from the prophet Isaiah, Matthew quotes it in his gospel to talk about Jesus' ministry. He says, "The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And for those who sat in the region and the shadow of death, light has dawned." Matthew 4 and verse 16. Back to the prophet Isaiah, Matthew draws on this verse because later Isaiah goes on to say, well, what is the light that has dawned? If you read from Isaiah again, verse 6 of chapter 9, Isaiah goes on to say, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." I can't hear those words without hearing Handel's Messiah going through my head. He's the one that made these verses stand out to me and know these verses. And Matthew is saying, look, Jesus is the one that Isaiah said was coming into Death Valley, into that dark place of the valley of the shadow of death. In our verse today, Psalms 23, verse 4, David says, "I will fear no evil." Why? Because you are with me. Notice, David does not say, "I will face no evil." The evil is real. The evil is undeniable. He does not say, "I will not have to face any evil following Jesus as his sheep. I will not have to face any evil." No, he says, "I will not fear the evil that I will face." I will fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. So our kids are 3, 5, and 7, and I've discovered that this is the prime age for being afraid of the dark. I didn't need Google to tell me that this is the prime age. And Desmond just started saying, the youngest one, that he's scared at night. If I leave the room to go do something else before he's fully in bed, that he's scared. And Eleanor said it was okay to share. She heard about some scary things, and sometimes she has a hard time going to different places of the house without a grown-up being there. But guess what? When I try to convince them that they're safe, I say, the house is safe, I promise you. The doors are locked, the gates are closed, even the lights are on, the house is safe. You can go there and you will be fine. Would I send you into a dangerous place? No, you can go there. But my powers of persuasion are terrible. Because as much as I try to reason my way to peace, it doesn't work. But guess what? When I go in person to whatever the scary place is, you would think I have superpowers. I am so powerful. When I come, as soon as I'm there, guess what? Fear is gone. No more fear. I want to hold on to that superpower a little bit longer. No more fear when I'm there. And this is what David is saying about God. My fear is gone. I will not fear evil because you are with me. Amazingly, this presence with fear even works with grown-ups. When we're alone and we hear a frightening noise or something of that nature, there's a portion of our brain called the amygdala, and it becomes very, very active. And it triggers our fight, flight, freeze response. So you get an increased heart rate, and you release your stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and you have heightened awareness. And researchers, have done studies to see how all these effects take place when you're by yourself or you're with someone else. And they have found, using fMRI scans, that when participants hold hands with a loved one or even just sit with a supportive companion, the response of the amygdala is lessened. Even the touch of a stranger, even a